Welcome, Ananda.
Hi, Kimberly. You're one of my favorite people in the universe. So good to be here.
Sweetie, it is mutual. It is such a treat to have you. And thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about all things midlife.
Oh. And I say that with joy and some.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, before I began recording, right? We were talking about our evolution and how we met. And I must have been, I don't know, early 30s probably. And my first book had just come out. Your book had just come out. And we were at some random, I don't remember what it was about or who it was for, but a book signing event in Baltimore.
Yes, it was. And you were in your 30s and I was in my early 40s. And woo! The changes that were going on at the time, both of us yoga teachers. I had just completed maybe 2 years in a yoga teacher training program. So I was well aware of tranquil space. Hadn't made it through the doors yet, but was well aware of it. And we bonded in a really unique way. I remember the pose that you had everybody do. You had us all do eagle. Y'all can, yeah, she's gonna do it because you probably wouldn't be able to see it. But one of my favorites since has become one of my favorites. I remember that because I was like, oh, that was really cool. I need to figure out a pose people can do when I talk to them.
Yeah, that's a good go-to. And sometimes people can't really fully wrap their arms. So
Yeah.
it's like doing this can
Mhm.
be a helpful way. And then lifting the elbows. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. It's been a fun journey. And yeah, and you know what I remember about you too, Ananda, is you were always at those New Year's Eve or New Year's Day practices.
Oh my gosh. That session, the New Year's Eve or the New Year's Day session during the holidays period they were lifelines for me. And I I'd say that they were lifelines in terms of not just the experience of restorative yoga and the journaling and the practices, but the community. It was an anchor for me that I told you before we jumped on the podcast that I do miss that. I miss the community. I'm big on community in my neighborhood and have since found some new communities where community is one of the tools and resources that I've used to navigate midlife.
So helpful.
Mhm.
And that ties into like our first kind of like big question about this. And again, I have my notes to the right. But, how has your perspective on life changed as you've entered midlife? So I guess when I met you, then you were definitely in the starting phases of midlife or the early phases of midlife,
Mhm.
right? And so you think about our evolution, right? From that first book signing event
Yeah.
to ongoing connections. I remember
Mhm.
coming to one of your book launch parties, then at another place on U Street.
Yes, Digital Sisterhood, that was the 3rd book.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
the
Oh
last
my
book that
gosh.
I published. I remember that. That was and I was on my way to turning 50. That was in 2014, and so I was on the journey. I was in my last decade of the 40s and moving forward because Carol, our dear Carol, we have to give a shout out to Carol. Our dear Carol was with you. And so that was a beautiful thing to have you be present because I had come to in those years, I had come to some of your book launches and purchased many of your books as gifts for others, in addition to using them for
You.
myself. Yeah. Yeah, the question, what was it? Say it again.
No, you're like, "What?" No, and it's a big one. I tell you, starting
Yeah.
with this is like throwing all of you lovely interviewees into the deep end. Okay, so let me just say
Mhm.
that. But it's like, how's your perspective on life changed as you've And for you, it's not even just entered, right? I can't believe you're almost 60. That's
Yes,
insanity.
we are 4 months to 60, baby, and it's real.
Wow.
In the best way, in the best way. In
Right,
the
right, good. I'm glad. But yeah, as you think about it, like, how has your perspective on life changed
Mhm.
during this journey?
I will say this, and I'll take it from decade to decade. From the teens all the way up to the end of almost the end of the 20s, I believed I was invincible and really hadn't had a whole lot of struggles. But then that thing called the Saturn return, and if you're into astrology and the first Saturn return, it kicked my behind, you know what. And I'm really grateful that at the time that it was happening, I was blessed to have some major shifts occur. Change happens all the time. And I started to understand that change is showing up a lot more than what I was raised to believe in terms of the religion, in terms of society, and in terms of my capacity to be able to control it. There was no capacity to control change. And so I started to learn how to surrender. And each decade, I continue to learn different aspects of surrendering. And so for me, my perspective is rooted in understanding that stuff is going to happen. Life is going to be life. And whether I like it or not, whether I want to admit it or not, whether my archetypes of the inner critic, the warrior woman, and the chief operating officer join together and try to resist change and create more chaos and more mess and more overwhelm and more stress, change is going to happen. And each decade has gotten me to this place where I've learned how to befriend the the voices, whatever you wanna call them, the archetypes that I just mentioned, the warrior woman, the inner critic, the chief operating officer that are really rooted in the male energy, no diss to male energy, rooted in the ego and action-oriented parts of myself. I've learned how to befriend them and to really start to soften a lot. Not a message that we get or that what I got as being born in 1964 in terms of what society says and how you should show up. It didn't help that I had gone to law school and that I was in investment banking and finance and no diss to any of these fields. But for me, the way that I breathed it all in and breathed it all out, it contributed to me being dragged through the 20s, the late 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s at different times because I resisted the change. And I really didn't have a skill set or practices or didn't even realize I had a choice in how to navigate the change initially until I I flatlined and everything that I had taken in, it wasn't working. And so for now, when I look at things now and stuff still happens, and it's this thing called postmenopause, not menopause, but PM, postmenopause. I learned last December, "Oh, you're in postmenopause." And I was like, meaning I believed that it was happening, but it kept the monthly cycle kept showing up. I call her Red Ruby. Red Ruby kept showing up even after 6 and 7 months. So I didn't believe it, but I'm here to tell you, I'm in menopause, postmenopause now. And that brings with it. So now I just look at everything as okay, it's a surrender opportunity. It's all about change for me, no matter how I call it, whether it's the the health issues that you may face. I like to call everything that's an issue a growth opportunity, whether it's my personal health or family or friends or things that you see we deal with as a society, the stress from the politics. let's not even talk about the pandemic. That's a whole nother series. But when these things show up, and they're usually colorful ways, I have to pull from my perspective that this is about change and surrender, and how do I do that? And I'll stop there because we can open up another door to this conversation or a window.
Yeah, but no, I think that's such an important phrase. It's a word,
Mhm,
but the concept of surrender and how important that is when so many of these things are out of our control. So it's like, how do we lean into things, even if we don't like them, and to view these challenges, right, as growth
mhm,
opportunities? And isn't it Pema Chodron that says, like, these demons will continue and not like devil demons, but these challenges, right? These demons will
mhm,
continue to show up until you've learned the lesson they've come to teach you. And then they'll be warm, like something warm, like hearted, like friends on the path,
mhm.
right? I remember
Yes.
that reading. I think it's from Wisdom of No Escape. And I'm just
Mhm.
like, okay, sometimes I'm just done with all the lessons and I just want my warm hearted friend on the path.
It gets
Yeah, and I know mindfulness for you, Ananda, is a really important piece. So can you speak a
Yes.
little bit about your practice?
Mhm. I can, and I'll take you all back to 27. That's when so much happened to me. That was 1992. Gotta love the 90s.
Yes.
That's when I started realizing that I had to do something different. And what I now know what was mindfulness. I didn't call it mindfulness then, but I was introduced to meditation at the time. I was introduced to physical fitness in a way that worked for my body and worked for my emotions, the walking, the drinking of the water. And I have to credit my mother to telling me as I was taking the bar exam, because that's really what led me to the self-care, the mindfulness, all of the things that I am today were born during that time. I took the bar exam 4 years in a row, 8 times, twice, and was missing the bar exam success rate by a point, 3 points, 5 points, 6 points, 8 points, until I realized this ish ain't working, and I need to get really clear, like, whatever the plan was from 16 to 26, 27, we need a new plan. And the people that I was surrounded by, my sorority sisters, we were all exploring all kinds of new age, if you want to call it, all kinds of self-care practices. And this was new for me, Catholic girl. And I said, why not? I don't have anything to lose. I didn't have health insurance, so my choice in food changed. My budget was low, and at the time, vegetables and fruit were a lot cheaper than meat. So I quickly made the choice to become a vegan, vegetarian, fruitarian during the summer of 1992 and settled somewhere in between vegan land and vegetarian land. And that made a significant difference on my body and how I felt. I dropped weight. I felt and slept better. I was able to connect. And when I learned about meditation, it centered me in a really beautiful way. And from there, when you start with meditation, a lot of times when you get into a mindful practice, this Kimberly, it opens the door to other practices. It opens you up, opens a heart up, all the chakras, whatever you want to call it. It opens you up. And a few years later, yoga showed up in my life. And that shifted me. A few years later, Reiki showed up. A few years later, I realized after having another opportunity to grow, and this was into my 30s, that these practices with the support of a therapist, they really do work for me. And I made a choice towards the end of my 30s that at some point I was going to study yoga and meditation and Reiki. It didn't happen until my 40s, my early 40s. That was the gift I gave myself during that time. It was what I needed. And the more that I got into these practices, the more that I realized and watched clients and watched people that I worked with as an artist in residence for Smith Center for Healing in the Arts at Howard University Hospital, at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Wow, that's an alphabet, a mouthful. The more that I watched people and heard how the guidance I was getting from the universe on how to incorporate these practices into everyday living, I realized that this is something much bigger than me. And I really didn't have a title for it still. I was just calling it self care. But it wasn't until we had the 2016 elections and the result of those elections sent me into a state of anger that I hadn't felt that angry ever in my life for a sustained period of time. And I just knew, I said, I am not going to make it. I am going to end up doing more damage to myself and those around me if I don't do something. So, my brother recommended a mindfulness program, a year-long program. And I looked at it and was resisting, resisting, because I was like, I'm not doing any more certifications. But one night I got that do it at 3 in the morning and I filled out the application. I requested a scholarship because I was trying to use that as, well, they're not gonna give me a scholarship. The next day, they approved it, gave me a scholarship, and that was where I went for my own salvation, the Engage Mindfulness Institute, and it was the best thing I could have done because for a year from doing this work that it shifted me. And that's when I started making the connections that everything that I had been doing from the time I was 27 till then, which was my early 50s, that it was all rooted in mindfulness. This ability to be aware of what's happening in the present moment. And I've created my own, like everybody, I encourage everyone to define it for yourself. And the 5 pieces of it that really keep bringing me back help me stay grounded, especially when I want to cuss somebody out or something's happening in politics or just life changes, grief, all kinds of stuff, the aging process, that loving kindness, that compassion, that non judgment, the patience, the forgiveness, things that are rooted in the Buddhist Eightfold Path that Kimberly and I both love and adore and incorporate into our lives. All of these things, that's mindfulness to me. I mean, and it's really just slowing your behind down. And mindfulness has become, especially during the pandemic, I had to figure out that one, what I had been doing for the last umpteen years in terms of self-care, that wasn't working anymore because I didn't have access to an in-person community. Tranquil Space had closed. The other places that I was going had closed. Being able to connect with people in person, clients, friends, family, all of that. Not being able to date, not being able to, in the way that I had become accustomed to, let's say that. So many different things shifted in this thing called change. And so, with the help of a therapist, I had to redefine what self care was for me. I had to try some new things. I had to learn how to be soft. And I remember hearing that in therapy, and I was like, what the soft? Another growing edge, if you will. But that softness, I had to soften what mindfulness was for me and still finding it to be a growth opportunity because it shifts and changes, especially with grief. That's been a big teacher in my late 50s. Yeah, so the mindfulness is really my lifeline now. It it helps me show up as who I intend to be and who I wanna be. And right now that in midlife, mindfulness in midlife is about making sure that I'm as grounded as I can be in order to take what spirit, the angels, the loving, wise, and well ancestors, including my mother Teresa, what they planted inside of me, and to stream it out. If you're into streaming, stream it out.
What does that
And
mean? Stream it out.
streaming, we all have watched Netflix and
Oh,
and
okay.
Prime and
Yes. Yeah.
everything, and it's how do you settle yourself just to focus so what needs to come through the divine, I call them divine downloads, that it can stream itself through so that
Mm.
I get out of the way. Not always easy to do, not always successful, y'all. But that's where I'm at. It's like for how many more years that I get, I hope it's 108 like the mala beads. If I get 108, if I get 40 something, 48 more years, cool. Let it be with great health. I want to be able to do that, to show up with the softness of mindfulness, the softer side, if you will,
Mhm.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you think about it, your initial career, like investment banking and lawyer, like those are very hard, masculine. Not that
Mhm.
you can't be soft in those two, but they're considered a little bit more in the, I think, in like the hard, right? And so I feel like, and maybe this was during the pandemic, but the idea of the soft girl came out, like, and it was
Yes.
very big, I think, in the Black community, even more so. I
Mhm.
think that's where I was finding so much about it. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I love this concept.
Mhm.
And it just seemed to me, and tell me like if I'm getting this right, but it was just like quiet nights at home, like
Mhm.
coziness and self-care and
Mhm.
prioritizing self. And I mean, you can still do that as a lawyer and investment banker, but it's just like how to embrace this like soft life. And I love you talking about bringing it in even to your mindfulness practice.
Mhm. And it's it's also too setting some boundaries with yourself. You may feel called to show up beyond your real capacity. You may not even realize. I spent the last year, my mom made her transition on July 9th, and I was with her, and I was blessed to be a spiritual midwife, if you will, to be the last person that she saw. It was a sudden thing. It was her time, and that was the prayer that I had been saying throughout the pandemic, that I want to be present when my parents transition to ancestorhood. With all of that said, I don't think anybody could ever be prepared to walk the path of death, loss, and grief after a close relationship, whether it's a parent, a family member, a spouse, whatever, partner. And I didn't realize until late July this year how emotionally exhausted I was. And not so much for having to shoulder things, cuz as a family, from my dad to my brothers to my sister-in-laws to my cousins to family friends to the whole Teresa Leeke tribe, cuz she has a tribe, there was lots of support, and even having therapy, even having community, in-person community support now, and having declared, "I'm gonna take care of myself during this process," still did not realize how emotionally exhausting it was, and moving forward I had to make a commitment to begin to just say no to myself on showing up for certain things. And that's the new part of the softness, is admitting to myself. I don't have to admit to others that I'm emotionally exhausted and that I need some pajama days, not one. I need a couple. Maybe I need to put on my Pat. I can't even think of Pat's last name, the lip gloss that I love. I call her name all Pat McGrath lip gloss that has the sparkles in it, and walk around with my pajamas and my sparkles and my crystals. holding my crystals, whatever that means, or watching Netflix, or drinking jasmine tea, or riding my bike, whatever it is, or just cozied up in my blanket. I have to give myself permission to do that and not beat myself up and say, well, you should be writing your new book. You should be helping your dad finish his book. You should. I ain't got no more energy for the shoulds.
Right.
Even if even if I could should, I don't have the energy to should. So it's recognizing that being asked to surrender in a deeper way and not always liking that. Not always liking that. But knowing that it's necessary and knowing that, hey, if you don't, you're gonna flatline, baby. And it's you're gonna really put yourself in a situation where you're gonna create even more chaos, more mess, more stress. So let's take the message now as opposed to it getting louder and later.
So important because that's one of the things that I have observed about you over these
Mm.
past almost 20 years. I mean, you always have a new project, right? You're always working on something new. It just has felt that way. And you mentioned lip color. Like I remember it was one of the New Year's, and I can't remember if it was Eve or day because I did both of
Mhm.
them from year to year, different times. And you mentioned, like, the power of a new lip color for you, and I
Yeah.
was like, I loved that because
Mhm.
it's such a subtle thing, but it can make such a big difference.
Mhm.
But to really hone in on the piece that you're saying of, like, the energy, right? Our energy, it's just not what it used to be, and it's not like we're just, like, chilling, eating bonbons, but it's we're not I think the World Domination Summit with Chris Guillebeau, it's not like we're
Mhm.
dominating the world, right? It's we're like, I'm just trying to get by day to day and still create beautiful things for the world,
Mhm.
right? And leave a
Mhm.
legacy of sorts, but
Mhm.
at a slower, soft girl pace.
Yeah. And recognizing that aging doesn't have to be this awful experience, that it's it's something that I can embrace. And how do we do that? Everybody's path is different. I can only say what is looking like today, like it's working. It may not be tomorrow, but it's looking like it today. For me, it starts in my heart. It's a it's a heart-centered awareness and approach to being present well in the real me. It's something that when I look back as I write this next midlife memoir, like you, the theme that's coming through is that, okay, you've gotten to this place and now you have language from the universe that you can name it, and it's thriving mindfully. And when I was blessed with that phrase in 2016, I didn't realize how much elasticity it had. Like, it wrapped itself around, and over the course of a couple of years, and thanks to the pandemic, I was able to really see it manifest or moonifest, if you will, in my life. And not just in a way that I would use it in my work as a coach, as a artist, as a writer, as a human design doula, and in any of the other titles that I choose to embrace. I really got to see it show up and really say, "Oh, okay. This is what it means to me, and this is how it's happening." And it showed up in the journaling. It showed up in the 3 a.m., 4 a.m. conversations with spirit. It showed up in the divine downloads in terms of offerings of my gifts to humanity. So yeah, that's even mind blowing because I'm just like, whoa, wow. My life's the container for this, and there comes with it, if you choose, a responsibility to yourself, to others and how you show up. If you, so you choose. You don't have to do it. You can sit and eat trail mix from Trader Joe's with the M&Ms. I'm telling on myself from
That's
yesterday.
good. You're like, for example.
For example, and you can watch episodes of reruns from shows that you know almost all of the dialogue on Netflix. You don't have to do this.
One could. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and one of the things too, as I hear you talking, I just think about is future. I can't believe you're gonna be 60, Ananda. I'm still just blown away.
Mm.
But, as you think about kind of like your future, what do you envision? Will you stay in DC? Are you still in the same apartment building that I
Yeah,
knew of you in?
I'm
Yeah.
still in the same, much like you. You
Yeah.
call your home a certain thing. I call mine the chakra castle.
Love it.
Y'all are looking at the sunny yellow kitchen in the chakra castle. All of the 7 colors are here in this home. One of my 40th birthday gifts to myself.
Nice.
And for me now, when I think about what's coming up, there are certain places in the world that I've been able to visit that really feel and I can call home. And a couple of those places are Bahia, Salvador da Bahia in Brazil. I see
Okay.
myself going back and forth from there. I see myself going back and forth to London. That's another place that has become a regular on my travels. So has Brazil. I would also say Cuba. Haven't been since my first trip in 2004, but I definitely feel connected to that place. Um, Baltimore is another place that I feel connected to, having gone to school there and college at Morgan State University. And during the pandemic, it was one of the places that I felt most comfortable traveling to because I have friends that are there or on the outskirts of Baltimore, and they have the things that I love. The museums, the Reginald Lewis Museum, the great vegan food, the vintage clothing shopping that is really the prices are like a 1990s price if you as opposed to some of the prices that I've encountered here in DC and in other cities. It's got the water, which is really important. DC has a body of water too. But yeah, those are some of the places that I see myself going back and forth. I'm staying open. That's one thing that I made a commitment during the pandemic to stay open to opportunities because I didn't and I don't want to get stuck as time goes on. I don't want to become rigid. And so for me, one of the ways that I stay greased up, if you will, in terms of what's happening here in my mind and what's happening in my heart and even in the body is making sure that I'm in community with people that are of all ages and that I'm moving myself around in communities that I have to be a lot more intentional. I just can't expect it to happen. I have to put myself in places, and one of the first things that I did during the pandemic was I started taking tennis lessons. I I set a goal and I said, "I wanna be my own personal vision or version of a Serena or Venus Williams or an Althea Gibson or a Taylor Townsend and so many others." So I started with DC Parks and Recs, and one of the reasons I started was because I said, "Well, at least once a week, I will have access to a community of different people. And at some point, I'll connect with some folks, and I have, and I continue. And I'm happy to say that I have a great community of tennis sisters that we are in our 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s. Yeah, there's some folks that I've connected that are in their 60s that have a lot of patience and cheering on as we all grow in our different levels of playing tennis. One of the things that I did realize during the pandemic, in terms of self-care, was that the physical fitness that I was involved in, the yin yoga wasn't enough. Go figure. Or the walking wasn't enough, that I had so much stuff going on with my nervous system that I needed to be a feeling of whoosh, because bar 3 wasn't happening. Love bar 3, but it wasn't physical enough. And so I started riding. I bought a bike, and there was something about being on that bike and riding down some of the streets that are don't have a lot of traffic in our neighborhood, 'cause Kimberly and I live in the same neighborhood, that just freed me up and brought me back to childhood of just riding, like the freedom of riding, the wind blowing through my baby afro. That was something. And then tennis was another physical sport that really helped me release the anger that I was feeling about losing, quote, control over my comings and goings based on the early days of the pandemic, not being able to move around. So those physical things without hurting myself from running, that was definitely something that I couldn't do anymore. I chose not to do because I wanted to maintain my knees. So yeah, I forgot what I was on, but I just felt, oh, let me share that.
Yeah. No, it's helpful. Yeah, because it's the sort of exercise that worked at one point may not work now, and
Mhm,
especially as you're going through the anger, right? And
mhm.
like feeling claustrophobic
Yeah.
almost during the pandemic. And the question was just around future.
Oh,
It's like,
yeah.
where do you see yourself in the future? But I think,
Yeah.
yeah, you've given good examples. And I just write down the different cities or countries. I was like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, good to know. Yeah.
Yeah, I see myself doing or being, I don't want to just say doing, being in the midst of creative expression that takes the form of collage. I decided to sign up for a crochet class, so watch out, to honor my
Mm.
grandmother, my mother's mother, and to see how that will shake out in terms of my mixed media collages and wire sculptures and the poetry. I'm really, really interested in making sure that I s I produce, because it's a production, that I produce a body of work that celebrates my ancestral connections, the women line in my family, that honors my mom, Teresa. So that's something I was able to start in 2023 with some wire sculpture with coat hangers, and that was really my first form of artwork that I embraced in my early 30s, and reclaiming the coat hanger as a symbol of affirmation as opposed to what it had been done before, and now we're in the post. Yeah, you all know. That's a whole nother conversation,
It's a whole other, yep.
but anyway, and the painting behind me, the bottom of it, you can see a little bit, but it
Yes.
incorporating all of that. I've been doing a lot of drawing, a lot of archetypes have come up, a lot of healing with what's happened in the body in terms of the fibroids, the shadows of the fibroids, what they've meant, where the anger has been. Ancestors coming through, done some ancestral healing work over the last couple of years. And I'm excited to see where it all takes me, and including coming back to my fiction writing. When we met, I had completed one book in a long series, and I'm sure this will carry me through 108 of these characters that had come to me through Love's Troubadours, African American and characters of African descent from all over the world, and their stories and how they've lived and loved. So that's coming through. We'll see. It's so many different things that can happen. I have decided too that I want to study yin yoga,
Ah,
believe it or not. Like
yes.
that's gonna be my 60th in my 60s. I'm gonna go to my girl Yael Flussberg and get a certification. One, because yin is still, shout out to Danielle,
Yep.
still one of my self-care practices
Mhm.
and tools that I use, and especially now in terms of mobility and flexibility, and tennis ain't no joke. I mean, without yin, I would be jacked. So I definitely see myself doing that because I really feel called to help all people move and stretch their bodies. Like, it brings me joy still in
It's
a different
yeah,
kind of way than before. So,
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
so much,
Yes.
who knows? Maybe
Well,
I'll plant, I don't know, we'll see.
well, you know what I love, and I can see you gardening, but it's like what I love is just your continued breadth of creativity, right? And just the evolution of it and the way you've dabbled and enjoyed many things. And so
Mhm,
it's a treat to see and just the vibrancy, right? You're not
mm,
someone who's, oh, I turned 50, so I'm like now invisible, right? You're just very much know like I am out there and I'm doing the
mhm,
thing, and I'm gonna show other people that it's possible, and I'm gonna play some
mhm.
tennis and
Yeah,
write
for
some
sure.
books. So,
Right.
I love it. Well, before I ask you my last question, Ananda, is
Uh-huh.
there anything else in particular that you would like to touch on or share with listeners to inspire them in midlife?
Yes. And this is coming from me because the grief journey has been really an invitation, y'all. Grief from close friends that are like brothers and sisters, chosen family. Shout out to Lauren, my classmate from law school who made her transition, is now an ancestor. My mom, to you can never prepare, but not but and to begin to look at how you will take care of yourself. Is it through a community? Is it through a therapist? Is it through self-care? What are some things that you can do to navigate the change that comes from death, loss, and grief? And it could be the death of a relationship, the death of who you were. That's a that's a big one. The death of a person, the death of just a period of time, your home. Whatever the loss is to really begin to find some tools that you can use, that you can put in your tool bag. That is something that I tell family, friends, clients, whoever will listen. What are you doing to take care of yourself in the midst of some great change? Not just the everyday change, but because I do believe we can plan, for some things, but if you have access to some tools now, it makes it a lot easier to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that. It's a great reminder, and I like to talk to people about a tranquility toolkit, right? So those things like here's a toolkit. This is like an actual, it's like my
Mhm,
makeup bag,
mhm,
right? But
mhm,
you think of even like a bag, right? That's what
mhm,
are those tools, right? It's okay. I know that I can go play tennis. I know that I can squeeze a ball. I know
mhm,
that I can use aromatherapy. Just what are those things that it's like, these help calm my nervous system in a moment. I know you can't just
mhm,
go play tennis in a moment, but these things that are just like, they're just easy. They're low hanging fruit,
mhm.
drinking water, drinking tea, just these things that, okay, they're basics. This hand lotion my partner gave me last year for Christmas. I mean, it's just lavender woods. It's just like
Hey.
random things, though, that are nice to just have around you to support and nurture in the everyday.
Yeah, definitely. I totally underscore all of that and high five you and hallelujah it.
Yeah, you've got your bracelets. Yeah, you've
Yeah,
got all the things. Your lip
yeah,
gloss, those great
yeah.
glasses.
What works for
Yes.
you?
Yes. So my last question, Ananda, is the name of
Yeah.
this podcast, is
Yay.
Tranquility du Jour. So
Mhm,
how are you finding tranquility in your everyday? And of course, you shared ideas, but I'm just wondering right now, at this time in your life, about to
mhm.
turn 60,
Yeah.
what brings you tranquility in your everyday life?
I will give you 2 examples from today after tennis. What brings me tranquility du jour is jasmine tea,
Mm,
journaling in the morning, giving myself that time. Don't always do it, recommitted to doing it today, and then coming home and taking some of the vinyl records out, 2 of them in particular, to play on my record player with my window wide open and folding up what needed to be folded up, making the bed because I definitely didn't make it when I left for tennis at 6 something this morning, and making sure that I dance as I fold up things. Having the dance parties, I started doing that during the pandemic. I would turn on the radio at 3 o'clock PM for WHUR, and the DJ that would come on, it would I was like I was on the Soul Train line, just having a good time. Whoever my neighbors are, they look through the window. Whoa! I was all over the floor like Alvin Ailey in my own mind. But those are some of the things that I use to find tranquility du jour, in my day-to-day experiences.
beautiful. Those are great examples. Thank you. And thanks so much for being here, Ananda. It's such a treat to see you again.
Well, I hope to see you and one of the beautiful pet children that you have walking down the street or riding a bike down the street like we normally do when we run into it
Yes. Yes.
soon.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and just your beautiful take on life.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for all of the work that you have done and all of the inspiration over the years. You really don't know how much you touch people's lives. You just keep doing what you're doing and shining yourself and sharing your gifts because we all need it.
Thank you.